So I want to thank you all for inviting me here. So I want to talk to you this morning about universal design for learning, its framework in how the brain learns, and the research that we've done at CAST over the past 27 odd years. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. So I want to start with just a legal concept. The definition of universal design for learning was actually placed into United States law in 2008, and in many ways it's fitting that it showed up first in the what's known as the Higher Education Act. So it's the post-secondary statute in the United States that guides requirements for post-secondary education. So I'll just read this to you because it has the scope and helps focus my presentation this morning. The term universal design for learning means a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice that A, provides flexibilities in the way information is presented, in the ways that students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the ways students are engaged, and reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including those with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. So the nice thing about this particular definition is it actually expanded out beyond disabilities to include a larger group of students. And we'd like to think of universal design for learning, obviously, as including all students. When CAST first began our work in 1984, we focused on students with very significant disabilities. If you think about all of us being somewhere on a bell curve, and at the very ends of the curve are students who we often refer to as being in the margins. If we can design solutions and accommodations and environments that work for the individuals at either end of the bell curve, we go a long way towards designing environments that are successful for everyone in between. And that was why it was so important for us to start at the edges. The other thing I just wanted to reference in regard to this definition is this word right here, challenges. School is supposed to be difficult. It is supposed to be hard. Part of the process of being a student is to be faced with challenges, and that you develop a series of skills to meet those challenges, and in the process you acquire new knowledge and skills. So one of the challenges of universal design for learning is how to eliminate the barriers that would stop someone from getting to the challenge without eliminating the challenge. And that is a very delicate situation at times, because instinctually I think we want to make things accessible, but at the same time we often can run into a problem of eliminating the challenge as we move along. So one of the things I'll be talking about is maintaining that challenge, maintaining high expectations for all students, but eliminate the barriers that make it difficult for some students to get to those challenges. There are three core principles in universal design for learning, and I just want to map these to the language in black is from the Higher Education Act, from the statute. The principles are the ones in yellow or orange. So to provide multiple means of representation, multiple ways of representing information. I think back on my high school, secondary career, and if singing on key had been a requirement for high school graduation, I would be in a very different circumstance now, but it wasn't. And for me, the skills that were required to graduate from high school, I actually mastered them so I could get a high school diploma and move on to higher education. But if you think about skills that you know other people have that weren't necessarily a requirement for some sort of certificate, you begin to see that there's a variation there. So we are not all of us respond the same way. Some of us respond quite well to images and video. Some of us respond to text. Some of us respond to audio. We need to provide multiple representations of concepts and ideas. We also need to provide multiple means of action and expression. multiple ways for students to respond or demonstrate the knowledge and skills that they have. One of the references I often make to teachers is I will ask a teacher or instructor to tell me what are the specific strengths of the students who are currently struggling in their class. And pretty typically, most of us who have been teachers, if we were in a classroom for a number of years, we knew more about what our students could not do than what we knew what they could do. And so part of Universal Design for Learning is thinking, let's find out what students are really good at. Let's provide them the opportunity to exhibit those capabilities and not just focus on the areas of struggle. And finally, multiple means of engagement. This sequence of representation, action and expression, and engagement is pretty much the one we've used at CAST over the last 20 years, and we're starting to rethink how things are organized, because I feel that engaging students should come first in this series, that in many ways it's the most important. If you cannot engage a student, then they're not going to persist in the face of a challenge, and they're going to back away and have much more difficulty. The UDL Guidelines are currently our working set of expectations or benchmarks. And this is just the summary, and I'll just quickly go through these. These are available at the UDL Center. So on your handouts, there's a URL or a web page address for finding these guidelines. So under multiple means of representation, the first level of the guidelines is all about accessibility. So if you go across, making sure that people can actually perceive the information that you want them to perceive, that they can act on it or interact with it in some way, and that they're involved. But then moving down, for example, under multiple means of representation, we want to make sure that people can perceive the information. Second, we want to make sure that they have an understanding of the skills necessary to continue to move forward, so they have the language, the expressions, or the symbols, and the understanding, and this will change depending upon the content. The symbols, for example, in calculus are quite different from the symbols in advanced physiology or medicine. And finally, moving down to a level of comprehension. So the purpose of the guidelines is really to create a progression that leads to increased understanding. And as you'll see from this page, this is an expansion of the prior page. Obviously, this is too small for those of you to read, but you begin to see some specific detail under each one of the guidelines. And this, again, this sheet is available at the UDL Center. But I really want to talk more specifically about these three concepts: representation, action and expression, and engagement, and actually give you some concrete examples of each one of those. This is one other reference that I'd like you to be aware of, and it has to do with, we have 2 online modules for Universal Design for Learning, and I just wanted you to know that these were available. They are freely available online, and we encourage feedback and comments from anyone looking through this. If there's something on these modules that you look at and go, I'm not quite sure what that means, shoot us an email and let us know, because we want them to be clear. So as you can see, they follow the 3 principles of representation, action and expression, and engagement, have multiple resources. These were designed for higher education to be available to insert into instruction or for use in workshops. We try and make as many resources available at no charge and keep them updated as much as we can. So I wanted to let you know they were there. And on your handout, there's the address for the web page. So let's start at the beginning. One of the nice things, how many people here are teachers or instructors or have been? Oh, good. Okay. I spent 8 years in a classroom with students with behavior disorders. And I was telling Maggie last night that when I was growing up, my parents were They were good parents. They were careful about what kids I could play with when I was growing up. And then I discovered as an adult that I could play with all the bad kids I wanted to. So I got very interested in students with behavior disorders and spent a number of years working with students who had challenges. At CAS, we're really interested in learning. That is our focus. And we discovered a number of years ago that through emerging brain research, that particularly with neuroimaging, PET scans and fMRI scans, that we were discovering things about the brain that we hadn't learned before. So this is going to be a fairly simplistic overview of a very complex organ and a very complex process. But sometimes it's helpful to separate things out into compartments and make it a little clearer. It's a bit artificial, and in the sense that I'm going to be talking about 3 brain networks, and I'm going to talk about each one of them separately and actually ask you to use yours separately. But keep in mind that they all work together, and they really never work in the way I'm depicting them. So the first one has to do with recognition, how we store and retrieve information, and for the most part it's in the hind portion of the brain, what's known as the occipital cortex. For those of you who have seen images of optic nerves, where the nerves come back and cross and go to the hind portion of the brain, we store an immense amount of information in this area. Strategic networks, which have to do with how we act and express, really have to do a lot with this area, the frontal lobes. They really help coordinate those expressive movements. And finally, affect, and what is here in yellow is the limbic system, which connects the neocortex, the newer portion of the brain, with the older portions of the brain. So these are 3 very distinct networks in the brain, and I want to talk about each one of them somewhat separately. So first, I'm going to start with recognition. I'm going to show you a picture, and then I'm going to take it away, and I'm going to ask you what you saw in the picture. And you can cheat a little because it's on your handout. So there's the picture. I'm going to take it back again. So I'll ask you some questions. Were there people in the picture? Yes. Was there furniture in the picture? Was it indoors or outdoors? Indoors. Were there any children in the picture? Well, nobody. Was there a dog in the picture? Maybe. Was there a cat in the picture? Okay. I'm getting detailed now. When I ask you what is here, and this picture is used for visual research, most people see 7 individuals. So the gentleman here, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 and 7 over here. And this looks to be a child. So if I ask you what, I'm asking you to recall from your memory what might be here. The one question I didn't ask you when the picture was not available to you was, can you give me a date? What's approximate date for this? And most people say 1800s, early 1900s. That seems about right. So we'll come back to this. So what you are essentially doing is you're tapping your prior knowledge. If I show this picture to a group of young children, 5 or 6 years old, and I ask them all the same questions as I asked you, they will answer identically with the exception of, can you give me a date for this picture? And because they don't have that knowledge. And my favorite response that young children give is yesterday, because yesterday covers a very broad scope. And if you're 5 years old, yesterday seems like it was years ago. So, okay, so let's talk more about variability. And I'm going to be bringing up and talking about variability a lot. we talk about, Maggie mentioned labeling and mentioned how we reference disability or how we reference diversity. And increasingly at CAST, we're talking about variability. We're talking about variability in the human condition, variability about how people solve problems, how people ambulate or walk from one place to another, the sensory capacities that people have, whether your vision is good or not, whether your hearing is good or not. I'm in the process of going from good hearing to not so good hearing. So I thought I'd experiment with all of you on, we'll do a little hearing test. Oops. Go back. This is going to be loud and unpleasant for a moment, but I'm going to play a tone, and I want you to raise your hand if you hear the tone. Okay? Everybody understand that? Okay, that's painful. That's 8,000 hertz. I'm going to go to 10,000. Okay. 12,000. Okay. I do not hear that. Okay. 14. Okay. 15. Okay. Us old folks are going, what? 16. Oh, smaller group. 17. Oh, we're thinning out. 18. Okay, now those of you keep your hands up. Let's see. Would you all stand up for a moment? Those who had just raised their hands. Okay, now I'm going to take a guess that you are all under 30. Or, oh, but I made you feel really good, didn't I? Yeah. You may sit down. Here's what's happening. As we get older, and particularly if, like me, you've had a secret life as a musician playing drums for too long in loud clubs, your hearing gets worse as you get older. And this is simply a developmental process that occurs, but it can be used. So there are a few places in the world where students or young children are skateboarding outside of businesses. And the businesses have discovered that the skateboarders can be an annoyance to their customers. So they mount a very small amplifier and microphone on the outside of the shop and play 18,000 kilohertz signal at a very loud volume. And it chases away all the adolescents. But the people who come into the shop don't hear anything. Right? So, variability. Extremely important. Not all of us process information in the same way. And this is really an important concept. So the different ways that you can transfer and present information, the better the chances are that someone will get it. It also eliminates ambiguity. I use mathematic examples a lot because oftentimes students fail math not because they don't know how to calculate or not because they don't know how to process an equation. They simply do not understand what is being asked of them. So in this circumstance, the challenge is find x. And this student said, what's the problem? Here it is, right there. Okay. Now, you all have pencil and paper. I'd like you to write this equation, 1 over x plus 1. So if everyone can write that down. This is pretty straightforward. We're not going to do any solving. Just have to write it. Okay. Everybody written something that has a pencil or paper? Okay. How many people wrote this? Okay. Good. How many people wrote that? Good. And some people wrote both. Right. Which one is correct? They both are. The reason I wanted to raise this as an example is one of the areas of work that I spend a lot of time on is looking at creating alternate versions of print instructional materials for students with disabilities, students who are unable to see or unable to process because of dyslexia or some other condition, standard print. And one of the challenges is mathematics. So what begins to happen when you take an equation, even a simple equation, and instead of presenting it visually, like this, we present it auditorily. So a narrator reads, assuming you cannot see, a narrator will read to you 1 over x plus 1. And the problem is, unless there's additional information provided, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right, which is unacceptable. So a lot of the research that's currently going on is how do we present mathematics auditorily to guide someone who cannot see the equation to follow the correct sequence and understand how the numbers are being set out. So one of the areas that's going on is to provide first an overview of an equation before rendering all the details. And it may help the listener begin to fit the details into the overall equation. So I'll give you an example. And what's currently going on in the research about speaking mathematics is thinking about depth. So first depth is simply a statement that says a fraction plus a variable equals a fraction. So a fraction plus a variable equals a fraction. So now you have a general sense of, you have a model of what this equation looks like, assuming you could not see this. The second depth, and I'll read this, starts this way. It says start fraction. The narrator will say that. So now we are beginning a fraction. Start fraction, a square root over 5, end fraction. So start fraction, a square root over 5, end fraction, plus a equals start fraction, a square root plus 5a over 5, end fraction. So as you begin to hear that structure is being provided for you, you get closer to the accuracy of the equation. There's actually third level depth because neither of these address this information up here in the square root, but that's addressable at the third level. So it's a way of leading someone just by hearing through very complex mathematics. So a research study recently done at Purdue University with equations that were intentionally ambiguous. There were equations that were meant to be confusing if all you could do was hear them. Asked students to differentiate and determine which was the most accurate. The purpose of this study was to determine if MathSpeak, which is the name of the technology that uses those 3 different levels of rendering and description, would help separate and make more accurate the reading. The initial results indicated that, as would be expected, students correctly identified the equations less than 50% of the time using conventional reading. So much as we did in that first example, you had a 50% chance of being correct. Now, for those of you who have taken mathematics courses, if you knew going into the class that you had a 50% chance of being correct, you would probably not sign up for that class because you also had a 50% chance of failure. Those are not good odds. When using math speak and descriptors in mathematics, students' performance on similar items increased to 95% accuracy. This is very, very engaging and promising research. And the other reason this is important is that we're finding that students who see just fine are able to help eliminate some ambiguity in mathematics by hearing an equation read to them, because it provides an alternate representation of the information. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go to strategic. Strategic networks are the front portion of the brain primarily, and this is an oversimplification, but kind of helps us in thinking about learning. And they really control our ability to act or interact with our environment. And keep in mind that our brain is constantly looking for change. Our brain stores information, and if it processes information, it references what it already knows and says, oh, I know what that is, don't worry about it, but it's constantly looking for change. So here's another example, just in terms of your visual field. For those of us who have sight, what we can focus on visually, if you put your hand out in front of you like this, that is about the span of your visual attention area. That's all you can really look at any given time, and anything else is peripheral. And what the brain is constantly doing, because you cannot focus on everything, you focus on a specific area, the brain is looking for variability along the periphery. So it's constantly measuring what's coming in with what it already knows. And that's why if there's something off on the side that distracts you, it's usually your brain saying, whoa, pay attention to that over there. Something is going on that's new or unanticipated, and will pull your attention in that way. So strategic networks. And this is really the process of an interaction. This image is used in brain research with a process called visual tracking. So an individual is seated in front of, with video cameras focused on the individual's eyes. And then the individual is asked questions, and the questions are tracked along a graph or a scatter plot. So I'm going to share with you two of those graphs. This question, I can tell by this scatter plot, I know what this question was. If I were to ask you, going back to this image, is there a dog in this picture? And I were to track where your eyes were looking, it would be from here down, because that's really the only place you would expect a dog to be. However, if I were to ask you, is there a cat in this picture, you would do this, because cats could be anywhere. They could be up high, they could be down low, they could be in the middle. And so this is a scatter plot. The question was, is there a cat in this picture? And this individual looks everywhere to try and determine whether or not there's a cat. This individual is an individual with some significant frontal lobe lesions, a brain injury. They have no strategies for processing information visually. Everything is the same. In fact, their approach to looking at this image is identical regardless of the question being asked. And what's really, so this is someone who really is unable to make discrete, appropriate decisions about their environment based on visual information. And what's really fascinating is that this individual does just fine on traditional IQ tests, because this type of challenge is not traditionally tested using IQ. This individual has a good memory. They're able to recall things. They're able to make associations. What they are not able to make is informed and effective decisions about information in front of them and processing it in a way that allows them to be independent. So this is someone who needs some continual ongoing care. And again, talks about the range of human variability. I want to introduce you to a young woman, but first I want to go back a little bit to mathematics. A binary tree is a nonlinear data structure which is used to store data or information in a very efficient manner. And in general, it looks like this. It looks like a concept map. Think about this as not necessarily a hierarchical system where one thing is subservient to another, but it's really all on the same level, much like a concept map, but all interrelated. So I want to introduce you to a young woman named Vi Hart. And the reason I want to show you this video is that I'll set the scene for you. She's in a math class and she's bored. And the math class is on, I think this was one on graphing. And so she starts doodling. Now, if the instructor were to come over to her and see what she was doing on her paper, he or she, the instructor, would probably say, oh, you're not with us, you're not following what my instructions are. And yet, as this video progresses, you begin to see that not only is she following, but she's expanding way beyond what the instructor anticipates. I will say this, she talks very quickly. This video is captioned, and we'll make it available if people want it, to be able to look at it.
Okay, let's say you're me and you're in math class. You're supposed to be learning about exponential functions, but you're having trouble caring about exponential functions because, unfortunately, your math class is probably not terribly engaging. You're supposed to be drawing and labeling some axes so that you can graph this y equals 2x thing, and your teacher seems to think that drawing and labeling axes is the very essence of mathematics, but you're bored and can't help but wonder why. So you do what any conscientious student would do in this situation and start doodling, and because you're me, you like to play games with yourself when you doodle. Here's one game. You're drawing a line, but when it crosses one of the blue lines on your little piece of paper, it splits into two lines. Maybe this line is like the neck of a mythical hydra, where every time one of its heads gets chopped off by a blue line, it grows two more in its place. You want to see if you can get all the way to the bottom of the page following this rule, because if you do, then you can draw all of the little hydra heads at the end, but you don't get very far in the first try. You decide to try again, this time spacing things out a little more at the beginning. Unfortunately, things are filling up fast, though you got farther than last time. Maybe if you have more rouge, or maybe if you sharpen your pencil more, you can get to the bottom of the page. Oh, and don't forget to draw and label your axes. If each broad swing of Hercules' sword chops off all the heads, thus doubling your number, well, you can see where I'm going. I'm not going to try and teach you math, just how to wield it for doodling purposes. In this case, that's going to be a lot of heads. Good luck, Hercules. But maybe drawing binary trees all straight like that is not an interesting enough game to hold your attention for long, so you start drawing them in arbitrary shapes, or less arbitrary shapes. Maybe you start drawing a binary tree that looks like a tree, and maybe you can't see this tree in very high quality because your camera, much like your math class, is fuzzy, unfocused, and altogether not very good. Maybe you change the rules slightly and make a ternary bush where each branch spreads 3 more branches. Unfortunately, your math class is 45 minutes long, and soon you need a more interesting doodle game. Say you go back to the game where your line splits at every level, only this time instead of trying to squish all the lines in, you let them hit each other. And when they crash, there's a fiery explosion, and the crashing lines end there. Maybe you turn your notebook sideways so that you can make sure you're getting the horizontal spacing right. Maybe, to go back to mythology, Hercules has a method where instead of cauterizing the necks of the hydra to keep them from growing back, he's found that the necks stick together if they get too close, and instead of growing new heads, they just fill up with blood. It might seem a little morbid for math class, but maybe, if the curriculum wasn't so appalling and the teaching methods weren't so atrocious, you wouldn't have to entertain yourself with these stories and games. Speaking of this doodle game, something very interesting is happening. Looks like your simple rules about splitting and crashing are creating Sierpinski's triangle, which is a pretty awesome fractal. But the point is not to learn about fractals or cellular automata or Sierpinski, but to show that simple doodle games can lead to mathematical results so cool and beautiful that they're famous. At least, famous to people like me. And if you're good at inventing doodle games, you might even end up doing some real mathematics during your math class. Anyway, maybe you don't care about accuracy. Maybe you try the game again, only you don't keep track of spacing. And when you make a mistake and accidentally grow heads where you shouldn't, you just roll with it. Now you've introduced an element of random error, and you want to know how this will affect the final picture. It still looks like a pretty awesome doodle and has many of the same elements, though it lacks the structure. Speaking of the structure, maybe, because you're really super bored and your class is seemingly never going to end, you start looking at the number of necks at each level and trying to figure out the pattern. Maybe you haven't forgotten about powers of 2. Anyway, I hope I've provided you with something entertaining to do next time you're bored. Good luck with your math class.
I apologize. That video player did not show the captions, which made it doubly difficult because she talks so quickly. But what I wanted to share with you, so here was a student who is not engaged in traditional mathematics, but clearly has all the concepts. And if her math instructor allowed her to express her abilities in the way she's most comfortable, which is starting with doodles and then associating them with mathematical symbols, he would discover a very talented and bright individual. And yet, if he came across her in math class doodling, he would probably say, "You're not doing math." And yet, clearly, she's doing fairly advanced mathematics and understands it. So, So allowing students to express what they know in multiple ways. It goes back to the title of my talk this morning, which is to keep the goals firm. The expectations are the same for everyone, but to provide multiple ways of getting to it. And not to confuse the goals with the means. One of the challenges that often occurs in education is that we confound or confuse the goal with the means of achieving the goal, and that's really something very important to keep in mind. I wanted to share with you one other expression. We have at CAST an online tool called Book Builder, and what Book Builder allows you to do is it's totally free. It allows you to create electronic books, books that can be read aloud to students, books that include images, but they also have what's known as agents, which helps support you. And I wanted to just share with you one book. Again, this one had to do with mathematics. And a lot of the resources I'll be sharing with you, we have 4 individuals at CAST who teach at Harvard in both the Ed School and the Department of Psychology. And we use Book Builder for students as an assignment. And the reason we do that is in most of the classes that we teach, these are graduate students, and they're graduate students at an elite university. And what they are really good at is writing. And the important thing with a lot of students is to push students out of their comfort zone and to get them into a new place where there's a little bit of discomfort so they can begin to think of creative ways of expressing things. And so one of the approaches we take with graduate students who are very comfortable with writing is we say you have an assignment, but you are limited to 1,200 words, but you can use unlimited amounts of any other types of media. You can use images, you can use video, you can use sound, you can use animation, but only 1,200 words. And what that immediately does for these graduate students is make them really uncomfortable because now they're in a situation that's new to them. And this was an assignment that was submitted by a graduate student. It was on the golden ratio. And this text can be read aloud. I'm just going to see if it'll...
The goal of this lesson is to introduce the mathematical concept of the golden ratio to middle and high school age students.
So each one of the Book Builder books has text-to-speech available so that if reading this and they need to hear it as well, it's there. So this is a curriculum guide about the golden ratio. And she's also included, and I won't go into the audio necessarily here, but she added an audio description of what the intent was on this page, so that if folks needed audio and be able to hear what her intention was, she could do that. And these are 3 agents, and the agents help focus a student in.
The golden ratio can be illustrated within special dimensions of spirals, triangles, and rectangles where the ratio of the length of the short side to the long side is 0.618.
So we have a number of these agents that can be employed in a variety of ways. And it's like having a guide sitting over there. And if you're uncertain as to the intent of what's being presented, you can click on the agents. And you can have each one of the agents actually express something slightly different. One might be how information is represented. One might be how a student could express what they know. And the third one might be how to engage a student. So that was our original thinking. Obviously, they've been used in multiple different ways. I'm not going to go through the whole book, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the types of resources that are out there. So this is the first page, talks about simple ratio, uses an animation. This entire book goes on for a number of pages. It has embedded agents to help focus an individual in. And it's really designed as a multimedia environment and a resource for teachers trying to teach the golden ratio to students. When we originally developed Book Builder, we thought it was going to be a place where teachers of quite young students, perhaps in the 5 to 6 to 10-year-old range, would use this as a resource. And we've discovered over the years that it's been used everything from very young to graduate level, because you can incorporate all different types of media. There are currently something like 27,000 books, part of a library, and most of those are shared publicly, and you can go in and look for a book on a particular topic, or you can create your own. In addition to having them on a shared library online, you can also download the entire book that you've created and put it on a CD, and it will run on Macintosh or PC or whatever computer you have. And it's totally free. I just wanted you to know it was out there. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about engagement and affect. And the arrow is pointing to the limbic system, which really connects the older portions of the brain with the neocortex, and really is responsible for helping you differentiate what's important at any given time. So for those of you listening to me this morning, you all had breakfast out there. A number of you had coffee. At some point, your biological processes take over, and you have to find the ladies' room or the men's room, and that will become increasingly important or less depending upon your capacity to keep your coffee. Okay, so a similar thing happens with this type of image. What do you think is, can somebody tell me a story about this picture? What's happening here? Take a guess. There's no right answer. So just, yes?
Someone just died.
Someone just died. Okay? And so who do you think this is?
Police officer.
Someone official? Okay. Good. And so this woman is somewhat apprehensive. It's uncertain. So if we tell a story about an image, where's this story coming from? Yes? Yes, it's here, right? It's not so much there. It's the same circumstance as if I show this to you and say, can you tell me a story about it? This is very uncomfortable for most people, because what happens with a Rorschach ink blot is if I say to you, what is here? You look at it and you go, it's an ink blot. But if I say to you, can you tell me a story about it? And what a psychologist will do is say, well, if they show this ink blot to 50,000 middle-aged white people and they all say it's two moose dancing around a totem pole, and then you show it to white person 50,001 and they say it's roadkill, you really want to know why is it that that person is feeling uncomfortable or vigilant. I'll get rid of it because for most of us it makes us uncomfortable. What happens with this image, now I'm saying to you, tell me a story about this, and I'm asking you to impose things on it, and oftentimes someone coming with someone has died is a very typical reaction to this. My favorite time to use this image in the United States is usually around the end of March. And the reason for that is that in the United States, federal taxes are due April 15, okay, so each year. So if I show this to a group of people around the end of March, someone in the audience will say, it's the tax collector, because that's what's on their mind right then, and they're imposing that on this image. So what we did with this image, the first thing I asked you to do was, what is here? Just what's represented. We talked about people and indoors and outdoors and so forth. And the second thing I did was I asked you to be a little bit more analytic and tell me whether there were was there a dog in the picture or a cat in the picture. Now I'm asking you to be strategic about the image. And then the final part of this is saying, what's going on here? What's the story? And that's much more emotional. That really is connecting with something that's important to you. So those are three networks around the same stimulus. And engagement is important to support persistence. If you are engaged in something and it's important to you, you will stick with it, even if it's a challenge. This student had a problem with persistence as they tried to factor a fairly complex equation. They get down to the end and they say, I give up. I'm done. We have all been here. We've all had this experience. I love this because it's such a nice graphic representation of giving up after repeated tries. I particularly like this right here. We're just done. I wanted to share with you, I don't have the animation for this, so it's not quite as engaging as it could be, but one of the assignments in one of the classes at Harvard on Universal Design for Learning is to design an instructional sequence for a particular student population. And this was an assignment to talk about the geometric foundation of classical architecture, specifically for students with autism. And students with autism often respond quite strongly and positively to graphical images and to animation, much less so to language and to text. So this was a depiction. So one of the students in the class actually created an animated environment where he started out with, this is a Santa Cristo Cathedral, and started out with this overview, this picture of the cathedral, and then had the cathedral rise up, and there was a floor plan depicted, and then had this image of the floor plan with scale, and then had an animation that showed that the entire structure is built on the basis of a square and a hemisphere. The hemisphere is half of dimensions of the square, and that the entire cathedral is constructed on these two simple geometric shapes, and that the ornateness and the whole overview of the cathedral itself is based on a square and on a semicircle. And it was all animated. So when this was presented in class, the other students in the class, and this is a graduate class, one of the students raised their hand and said to David Rose, who teaches this class, they said, Dr. Rose, are we going to be graded on presentation? because this was such a magnificent presentation, and it was done by a doctoral student at MIT who's doing graphic design and technology. And so instead of responding, David, who's the instructor, said to the class, what do you think? Should we grade, should the assignments be graded on their presentation? And there was a big debate. And the student who did this got up in front of the class and said, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a doctoral student at MIT. I'm working in graphic design and technology. And I am also dyslexic. And I have a terrible time with words and reading. And all through my academic career, I have had to prove my competency in words. And now I have an opportunity to show you what I can really do. And you tell me you're not going to grade me on that. He got an A. And it was a really inspiring moment for the rest of the class to realize that here was a student getting up and saying, what you are all good at, I am terrible at. This is what I'm good at. I want to share with you what I'm good at, and I would like to be graded on what I'm good at, as opposed to being graded on what I'm bad at. So that was really good. I'm going to actually skip over Weihart on this one, because I have a couple of other things I want to share with you. So I want to go back to just thinking about the guidelines and talking about how these have been interpreted at a particular site. And this is from a project called Enact at California State University System, which is a number of colleges in California. And they developed a little sheet called 14 Indicators of Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education. And it was a way of looking at the higher education environment and saying, what is here? What is not here? What could we probably link? And so these were based on the UDL principles and related back to the guidelines. But I just wanted to go through these because they relate to higher education and indicators that there's some attention being paid to the design of the environment. Keep in mind, one of the important things about UDL is making an assumption that you are going to have students in the classroom who have a great deal of variability, and that you should not wait until one shows up to make the environment flexible and responsive. You should have it there from the beginning, because not only does it support students with disabilities or students for whom Dutch or English or French is a second language, it supports all students by providing more alternatives. So the first one is that information should be placed in the course syllabus about where to find support, something that the students are made aware of right up front. A syllabus that identifies all the course requirements and course expectations. This is just basic time management of helping students to know and to chart when things are due. I mean, it may seem simple, but I have seen a number of syllabuses that were marvelously depictive of what the instructor's goals were and so forth and so on, and there was virtually very little information about when the class met, where the room was, how to get in touch with a faculty or a graduate teaching assistant, all those basic things. So multiple forms of contact information. Accessibility in all course content and materials. This is a big challenge, but it should be there. Multiple ways of presenting course content utilizing different modes and media. So not just images, not just video, not just text, not just audio, but as many ways as possible. Multiple ways of identifying and explaining essential course concepts. And this goes to goal setting, making sure the goal is clear and that we separate the means from the goal. And this one is really critical, and it often is not done. Examples and illustrations and models of all major course assignments or activities. And here's what I'm talking about. If you are teaching a course and you are giving students assignments and you have expectations, whether it's a paper or a model or delivering something, a multimedia presentation, provide them with some models that are expert, because otherwise they are going to guess and they are unlikely to meet your expectations because they don't know what they're shooting for. So if you give them a model and say, this is an A paper for these reasons, clearly stated goal, nice transitions, good use of language, good use of references. This is an A PowerPoint presentation. This is a high-level video presentation. This is nice, or high-level or an A oral presentation. If students have models, they have a sense of what's expected, and oftentimes faculty do not provide those models. It's a guesswork process. And why should that be a barrier? Provide clear guidelines and rubrics for all major course assignments and activities. When you are a student, you would like to know how you are to be judged, how your presentations, exhibitions, what is the measurement for moving forward. That's really useful information. Clear and specific feedback on assignments, and encouraging resubmission as appropriate. We often have to assume, remember in that first little cartoon where it said find X, and the student said, here it is? It is not uncommon for the first assignment in a class to have students miss the mark because they are uncertain as to what is being asked of them. So a process for resubmitting an assignment, particularly the early ones, can be really useful in allowing you to see what it is a student really knows once they really understand what the assignment is. Allow students to demonstrate their knowledge through varied means. This gets back to understanding a student's strength as opposed to just their weaknesses. And encourage students to use assistive technologies and varied media. Pretty straightforward. Using varied instructional methods to involve students in the learning process. Encourage natural support systems in and outside of class. Provide alternatives for how students can participate or complete course activities. I'm going to share with you something very concrete that I think is very effective. One of the things that happens in classrooms, particularly for students with disabilities, print-related disabilities, dyslexia, fine motor problems, so forth, at least in the States, this is commonplace. A student will apply to a disability service office for a note taker, that someone else in the class who's a strong student will take notes for that student and share them. And in David Rose's class at Harvard, he said, well, why shouldn't we simply build that into the course? And so what he did was he assigned students as note takers for every class. And the notes were then made available on the website for every student. It was no longer an accommodation. It was a part of your contribution, so you did it once. And an interesting thing happened, and I want to just share with you some of that quickly, some of that interest. Pretty traditional. Here's the class. Here's the date. Here's the focus. And this is a very hierarchical outline. The specific details of this are not important. What I'm looking at is kind of the format. Okay? And this was the first note taker, and there was a group of 5 note takers. So I'll share with you let's see. Student number 2. Okay. Things are starting to change here. We have a graphic that's incorporated. And notice the structure is a little different now. There are bullet points. There's a graphic here. Even a little interactive layout. So this is a slightly different way of taking notes. We'll go to, whoops, sorry. We'll go to student number 3. Now something is happening that we're aware of, and that is that once students begin to look at each other's notes, they get a little competitive. And they want their notes to be distinguished from the previous set of notes. So this one has images and actually has questions and answers embedded in the notes themselves. And this is talking about, I'll just share with you what this topic is. David's wife, Ruth, has perfect pitch, which means if any sound she hears, she can quickly identify and say, oh, that's a B flat. No, that's a middle C. She just hears it. Which, for most of us, and it's very rare that individuals have perfect pitch, and a lot of them turn out to be very skilled musicians. But it becomes a major disability in a couple of situations. And David talks about his going to church. And he loves to sing. And he loves to sing quite loudly. And his wife, Ruth, is next to him. And there are a lot of people in church who are also singing quite loudly, most of them off-key. And for Ruth, it's a torment, because she hears all this bad singing, which to her is bad singing, and she sometimes has to leave because she can't block out the fact that everybody is not quite on key. And so you have this immensely, strong talent in a circumstance where it actually becomes somewhat of a disability, because she cannot enjoy choral singing unless everybody is on key. Anyway, so that's what the notes are about. Let me just go through just a couple more of these to get a sense of what's happening here. This student decided to emphasize each point that was made during the class with a cartoon. So this one says, I don't know how to tell you this, but it looks like you have a brain the size of a walnut. Anyway, all the cartoons are encouraged throughout. I'll show you one more. This one, the student had a mobile device with a camera and decided to photograph himself and the instructor and his classmates at various points during the class and embed those images into the note-taking. He says, I'm wearing a blue shirt. It's from the state of New Jersey. I stole it from my mom's laundry basket. And they're talking about different people in the class and what's going on. And this reads like, here's Dr. Rose, and there's their class, there's Schweppes. So here's a very interesting phenomenon. We have the process of note-taking that was really initially designed as an accommodation for a set of students who needed an additional support in their learning. Students with dyslexia, students with print-based disabilities, or with limited fine motor skills would take advantage of skilled note-takers in their class. And in this class now, note-taking is part of the expectation for every student in the class. And what it provides is an alternative for students to express what they know in whatever manner they are most comfortable with that will show their strengths. There are notes that are simply graphic depictions of the entire class. There are notes that are rendered almost like a short story. And so you, as a student in this class, will know that a day after the class is completed, the very next day, you can go to a website and choose all or which of the 5 note sets that's there fits your style. And so it simply provides another avenue for expression for students. Just a couple of references. I'm almost done. National Center on Universal Design for Learning. These are all in your handouts. And then the 2 bottom references have to do with implementation projects, Colorado State University and the California State System, that have a lot of references and resources available. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. In the UDL framework, accessibility is really, for us, the lowest common denominator, that we want to make sure that all content and materials are accessible to as many students as possible, and that we often refer to it as being essential but insufficient to get to universal design for learning, because ultimately what we're talking about is learning, and we have to reach students before we can teach them, but we don't want to stop simply at reaching them. We want to be able to expand and address those 3 brain networks. Other things have to do with the United States, and there's a very strong push now in the United States to make sure that all materials that are being introduced and used with students are accessible. And I was talking with Maggie last night, and Almost every university in the United States is capable of taking a print book and creating an alternate format version. They can scan it and create a digital version. They can have it read, have an audio version. They can find, in all likelihood, a Braille version someplace, as long as the material they're working with is print. But what's now happening is increasingly the materials flowing into higher education are digital, and they're network-based, or they're coming primarily network-based on CD-ROM, and virtually no university can retrofit those materials to make them accessible, which means that the producers of those materials have to be accessible and have accessibility designed in from the beginning. And so the push now from the federal government in the States is to make sure that universities only purchase materials that are accessible. So it is totally changing the way instructional materials are created and produced in the country. I just said that, so I'll skip over that. So UDL is not just access to instruction. It's not only technology. It is about learning and increasing learning and achievement, which is the core business of higher education and post-secondary. So, last thoughts. UDL works in higher education when it's a framework embraced by the entire institution. We're not talking about islands, little islands of separate flexibility, but we're talking about an institutional perspective on the variability of the human condition, the need for environments to be flexible, maintaining high expectations. And one of the challenges we have in post-secondary is really making sure that we stand on the side of faculty and the institution and say, absolutely, maintain your high expectations, but don't confuse the goal with the means of achieving the goal. Because you may discover that there are 15 different ways to get to the goal, not just the 3 you're currently using. And that's really important. The more ways we can provide for students to get to the goal, the better the chances are they'll get there. Efforts to plan for and address learner diversity are strongly interrelated. So we think about factoring here. But pulling things together, that there's coordination. Part of the process really has to do with instructional faculty, people selecting instructional materials, people thinking about how the process of instruction occurs. Oftentimes, when we think of UDL in post-secondary, the challenge really is that our experts are content area experts and not education experts, and that there's a difference there. Variability strengthens and enriches culture, and the result is a responsive environment with the built-in or designed-in capacity to meet the needs of all learners. So it becomes an environment that responds to all learners, not just those with disabilities, but including those with disabilities, and offers flexibility for all its students. So thank you all for your time this morning, and I believe it's time for lunch. I'm sorry? Oh, yes, thank you. Maggie's over here going, questions, questions. Any questions? I've been babbling at you for the last hour, so. And I'm happy, I'll be around for lunch, so if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to chat then. So. Thank you all very much.